Emma never worked for herself. Every long shift, every aching muscle, and every sleepless night was for the two little lives that depended on her. No matter how tired she felt, she never let it show. Her kindness never faded, and her spirit refused to break. But life had been cruel, and fate was about to test her again until a stranger walked into her world, changing everything in a way she never imagined. The restaurant buzzed with life, filled with the scent of sizzling food and the hum of conversations. Plates clattered, laughter echoed, and servers hurried from table to table. Among them was Emma Hudson, a young pregnant waitress who moved through the chaos with practiced ease. She balanced a tray of steaming dishes, her smile never slipping, even as exhaustion weighed on her. Her swollen feet ached, her back screamed in pain, but she had no choice. Her family needed her. Emma had been working tirelessly ever since tragedy struck her life. After her husband's sudden passing, she was left alone to provide for her unborn child and her little son, who stayed with her mother-in-law while she worked. Every shift she picked up, every extra tip she earned it, was all for them. She refused to let her son feel the absence of a father, to let him grow up without warmth and security. She wasn't just surviving. She was fighting. The sound of clinking glasses and muffled chatter filled the air, but Emma barely noticed. She was too focused, making sure every customer was served with care. As she moved from one table to another, a dull pain spread through her legs, but she had long learned to ignore it. There was no time for rest. Hours passed in a blur, and by the time her shift neared its end, exhaustion clung to her like a heavy blanket. Taking a short break, she stepped outside, inhaling the crisp evening air. But just as she started to relax, her eyes landed on something that made her heart stop. Near the restaurant entrance, a small figure sat on the cold pavement, curled up in the shadows. It was a little girl, no older than 6, her tiny arms wrapped around herself as she shivered against the night air. Her clothes were tattered, her face smudged with dirt, and her hollow eyes darted around, watching people pass without sparing her a glance. Emma's chest tightened. The child looked so fragile, so alone. How many people had walked past her today? How many had looked the other way? Without thinking, Emma turned on her heels and rushed back inside. Using her own hard-earned money, she bought a warm meal. Then, carefully balancing the tray, she stepped back outside, knelt beside the little girl, and placed the plate in front of her. "Here, sweetheart," she said gently. "Eat as much as you want." The girl hesitated, her wide eyes filled with disbelief. But as the scent of warm food reached her nose, she grabbed the fork and started eating hungrily. Emma watched, a soft smile playing on her lips. It wasn't much, but at least tonight, this child wouldn't go to bed hungry. Little did Emma know, someone had been watching, and this one act of kindness was about to change her life forever. The next day, the restaurant was just as busy as ever. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling breakfast filled the air, mixing with the sound of laughter and clinking silverware. Emma, despite the weight of her growing belly and the ache in her legs, moved between tables with quiet determination. She greeted customers with a warm smile, took orders with precision, and made sure everything was served perfectly. As she set a steaming cup of coffee in front of a suited man near the window, the door chime rang. Another customer had entered. Without looking up, Emma grabbed a menu and turned toward the new arrival. "Welcome. Would you like to start with something to drink?" she asked, her voice polite but carrying the slightest hint of exhaustion. But as she lifted her gaze, her breath caught. It was him. The same man from yesterday. The one who had sat quietly in the corner, watching everything. He was back. Emma didn't know who he was. To her, he was just another well-dressed customer. But today, there was something different about the way he looked at her, like he had been waiting for this moment. "I'll have the same as yesterday," he said, his voice calm and steady. Emma nodded, scribbled down the order, and turned to leave. But before she could walk away, his voice stopped her. "You didn't have to do that yesterday." Emma turned back, confused. "Do what?" The man leaned forward slightly, his gaze locked onto hers. "That little girl outside. You gave her a meal and paid for it yourself. Why?" She hadn't expected anyone to notice, let alone bring it up. But after a brief pause, She let out a soft sigh and offered a small smile. Because she was hungry, she said simply, and no one else was going to help her. The man studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the empty seat across from him. Sit. Emma hesitated. She was still on the clock. But something about his expression made her pause. Slowly, she slid into the chair across from him. You're pregnant, he pointed out, his voice holding a hint of concern. And yet, you're still working so hard. Why? She never shared personal details with customers. But for some reason, she found herself answering. My husband passed away, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I have a son. My mother-in-law takes care of him while I work. But I can't stop. I have another baby on the way. I have to make sure my kids have a good life. For the first time in a long while, Emma let her guard down. Saying the words out loud made them feel heavier. But she refused to break. The man didn't speak immediately. He simply observed her, his expression unreadable. Then, after what felt like forever, he nodded slowly. You're a strong woman, he finally said. And hardworking. Emma gave a small smile. I don't have a choice. The man continued to watch her, something shifting in his eyes. He had come here today for a reason. And now he was certain of it. The next morning, the restaurant was packed with customers enjoying their coffee and breakfast. The hum of conversation filled the air as plates clattered and waiters rushed from table to table. Emma, moving as fast as her tired legs allowed, worked through the morning rush. She greeted customers with her usual smile, took orders with care, and made sure every plate was delivered on time. She barely had a moment to breathe before the door chime rang again. Without thinking, she turned her head, ready to greet the new arrival. Then, she froze. It was him. The same man from the last 2 days. The quiet observer who never spoke much but always watched everything. Emma quickly regained her composure, wiping her hands on her apron before walking toward him. Good morning, she greeted, her voice steady. Your usual coffee? The man gave a small nod but didn't even glance at the menu. Instead, he looked at her, his sharp eyes studying her again. Emma hesitated. Something about his gaze made her feel like he was searching for an answer she didn't know she had. Before she could turn away, he spoke. Sit with me for a moment. Emma blinked. I'm sorry, but I'm working. I won't take much of your time, he assured her. Please. Just a few minutes. She glanced at her manager, who was busy handling another order. Taking a deep breath, she reluctantly pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. The man leaned forward slightly, his fingers tapping the table. I never introduced myself, he said. My name is Ethan Carter. Emma tilted her head slightly, still unsure where this was going. Nice to meet you, Mr. Carter. Ethan's expression softened. How long have you been working here? Emma hesitated before answering. Almost 3 years. And you plan to keep working through your pregnancy? Emma let out a small, tired chuckle. I don't really have a choice, she admitted. I need to provide for my son and my baby on the way. This job is all I have right now. Ethan nodded, his face unreadable. You're a remarkable woman, he said. Not everyone would go out of their way to help a stranger like you did with that little girl. Emma shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't used to receiving compliments. It was nothing, she said quickly. She was hungry. I just did what anyone would do. Ethan leaned back, watching her closely. No, he said firmly. Not just anyone would do that. Most people would pretend they didn't see her. Before Emma could respond, the door swung open again. A sharply dressed man entered and walked straight toward Ethan, leaning down to whisper something in his ear. Emma frowned. Who was he? Ethan gave a small nod before turning back to her. My assistant, he answered, as if reading her thoughts. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper, and slid it across the table. Emma's heart pounded as she picked it up. Her breath hitched. OFFICIALPURCHAASAAGREMENT. This restaurant now belongs to Emma Hudson. Her hands trembled as she looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock. What is this? Ethan stood up, buttoning his coat. I bought this restaurant, he said like it was the simplest thing in the world. Emma shook her head. Why would you do that? Ethan smiled. Because people like you deserve a chance to succeed. You work hard. You care. You never give up. This place should belong to someone who truly values it. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. She couldn't believe what was happening. Ethan took a step back, giving her one last reassuring nod. Never stop being who you are, he said. Your kindness and hard work are what make you special. Don't ever lose that. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door, his assistant following closely behind. Emma sat frozen, gripping the paper tightly. Her life had just changed forever. Emma sat there, gripping the paper, her hands shaking. Her heart pounded in her chest as she read the words again. She owned the restaurant. Her mind struggled to process it. Just a moment ago, she was a tired, overworked waitress, barely making ends meet. And now she was the owner? She looked up at Ethan Carter, the mysterious man who had been coming in for days, quietly watching. She had no idea he had this kind of power. Why? She finally whispered. Ethan gave her a small smile. Because you deserve it. Emma shook her head. But you don't even know me. I know enough, Ethan said calmly. I've been watching. I see how you treat people. How you work hard, even when it's tough. How you helped that little girl the other day without expecting anything in return. You have a good heart, Emma. And I believe good people deserve good things. Emma's eyes filled with tears. This had to be a dream. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. But, I don't know how to run a restaurant, she admitted, her voice trembling. Ethan chuckled. You've been running it already, haven't you? You're the one who keeps this place moving. You know, the customers. You know the staff. All you need is the opportunity to take control. Emma swallowed hard, staring at the paper in front of her. The official documents made it real. This wasn't some joke. He really meant it. But I don't have money, she said weakly. Ethan leaned in slightly. I'm not asking for money. This is a gift. A gift? Who just gives away an entire restaurant? Emma's mind raced. There had to be a catch. There always was. Why me? She asked again, needing to hear it one more time. Ethan's expression softened. Because I was once in your shoes, he admitted. Years ago, someone gave me a chance when I had nothing. They believed in me when no one else did. Now, I'm passing that kindness forward. Emma covered her mouth with her hands, overwhelmed. Ethan reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a business card, and placed it on the table. My number, he said. If you ever need advice, call me. She looked down at the card, then back at him, barely able to find her voice. I don't know what to say. Ethan smiled. Say yes. Emma let out a shaky laugh. Yes, Ethan stood, buttoning his coat. Then it's settled. Congratulations, boss. With that, he turned and walked toward the door. Emma sat there, gripping the paper tightly, still in shock. Her entire life had just changed in a way she never imagined. And for the first time in a long time, she had hope. Sophie could barely stand. Her legs wobbled as she clutched the edge of the counter, trying to steady herself. The restaurant was packed, and she had been on her feet for hours. Then, everything went blurry. The next thing she knew, she was on the floor, gasping for air. Customers rushed toward her, their voices blending into a jumble of noise. Someone called for help. But before anyone could react, her manager, Mr. Carson, appeared. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't show concern. Instead, he scowled. Get up, he snapped. We're not paying you to lie around. Sophie's face burned with embarrassment as she struggled to sit up. I just felt dizzy, she whispered. Mr. Carson rolled his eyes. Then go splash water on your face and get back to work. We're short-staffed. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. She was pregnant, exhausted, and barely making it through her shifts. But she needed this job. That's when a deep, commanding voice cut through the noise. She's not working another second under you. The entire restaurant turned to see a tall man stepping forward. His expensive suit, sharp features, and piercing gaze made everyone go silent. Mr. Carson scoffed. "And who do you think you are?" The man smirked. "I'm Daniel Grayson, the billionaire." The name sent a shockwave through the room. Everyone had heard of him, the real estate mogul, the investor, the man who could buy and sell this entire restaurant without breaking a sweat. And right now, his eyes were locked on Sophie. "She's done here," Daniel said firmly. "And so are you." Mr. Carson laughed nervously. "You can't fire me. I own this place." Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded document, and placed it on the counter. "Not anymore," he said. "I just bought it." Silence. Mr. Carson's face went pale. "What?" Daniel leaned in slightly. "You're fired." The entire restaurant gasped. Employees exchanged stunned glances. Customers whispered. Sophie sat there, speechless. Daniel turned back to her and offered a hand. "Come with me." She hesitated, but something in his eyes told her to trust him. As she took his hand and stood, he spoke again, this time softer. "You shouldn't have to struggle like this." Sophie swallowed hard. "But I don't have anywhere else to go." Daniel reached into his coat pocket and handed her an envelope. "Now you do." With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a check. A life-changing amount. Tears streamed down her face. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel smiled. "Because I know what it's like to be overlooked. No one helped me when I needed it. But today, I can help you." Sophie covered her mouth, overwhelmed. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't in years. Emma moved quickly between tables, balancing a tray full of plates. It was another exhausting shift at the diner, and her feet ached with every step. She barely noticed the man sitting in the corner until she got closer. Something about him seemed familiar. He wore an expensive suit, had a confident posture, and looked around as if he owned the place. Emma placed a glass of water in front of him. "Can I get you anything else?" The man studied her for a moment. Then he smiled. "Emma, is that you?" Her heart nearly stopped. She knew that voice. Looking at him closely, memories rushed back. It was Jason Carter, her old college friend. But Jason wasn't just anyone now. He was a wealthy CEO, a name that appeared in business magazines. Emma swallowed hard, suddenly feeling self-conscious in her worn-out uniform. She said, barely believing it. He grinned. "Wow, I never expected to see you here." She forced a smile. "Yeah, well, life takes us different places." Jason's smile faded slightly. "How long have you worked here?" "A while," Emma admitted. "It pays the bills." He was quiet for a moment, tapping his fingers on the table. Then, he asked, "Do you like it?" Emma hesitated. She wanted to lie, to say she was fine. But the exhaustion in her bones told the truth. "It's not my dream," she finally said. Jason nodded. Then, without warning, he stood up and pulled something from his pocket, a business card. "Come see me tomorrow," he said. "I think I have something better for you." Emma stared at the card. "Wait, what?" Jason chuckled. "Emma, you were always the smartest person in the room back in college. I'd be an idiot not to hire you." She blinked, trying to process what was happening. "But I don't have the right experience." "I don't care," Jason interrupted. "I know your work ethic. I know your potential. Let me help." Emma felt her throat tighten. Was this real? Could she actually leave this job and start over? A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Emma!" Her manager, Mr. Reynolds, marched over, scowling. "Stop talking and get back to work." Jason's eyes darkened. "Excuse me?" Mr. Reynolds scoffed, barely glancing at Jason. "She's not paid to stand around." Jason took a step forward. "Actually, she won't be working here anymore." Mr. Reynolds laughed. "Oh, yeah? And who are you to say that?" Jason smirked. "I'm your new boss." Silence. Emma's eyes widened. "What?" "I just bought this diner." Mr. Reynolds went pale. "That's impossible, not anymore," Jason said. Now, Emma, are you ready for something better? Emma looked at the card in her hands. A new beginning. A real chance. She smiled. I'm ready. Maya struggled to stay on her feet. Her back ached, and her swollen feet burned as she carried a tray of drinks. She was 7 months pregnant, but her boss, Mr. Lancaster, didn't care. Move faster, Mia, he barked from behind the counter. She bit her lip and pushed through, knowing she couldn't afford to lose this job. Every dollar mattered for her baby's future. Then the room spun. Her vision blurred. Her legs wobbled, then everything went black. THUD. Gasps filled the diner. Plates shattered. Mia lay on the floor, unconscious. Instead of concern, Mr. Lancaster scoffed. Seriously? Get up, Mia. You think you can just lie around? A deep, commanding voice cut through the room. Is that how you treat your employees? The diner went silent. Everyone turned toward the voice. A tall man in an expensive suit stood near the entrance. His sharp gaze was locked on Mr. Lancaster. Mia blinked, trying to sit up. The man rushed over, gently helping her. Are you okay? She nodded weakly. I think so. Mr. Lancaster crossed his arms. Who do you think you are, walking in here like that? The man turned, his expression ice cold. My name is Elijah Grant. Mr. Lancaster frowned. And why does that matter? A waitress gasped. Wait, THE Elijah Grant? The billionaire? Whispers spread through the diner. Elijah Grant, one of the richest men in the country, was standing in their tiny diner? Elijah's eyes narrowed. I came here for a simple meal, but now I see something much more important. He helped Mia into a chair. You're working while heavily pregnant, and your boss doesn't even care when you collapse? Mia lowered her head. I don't have a choice. I need this job. Mr. Lancaster snorted. If she can't handle the work, she shouldn't be here. Elijah's jaw tightened. Then she won't be. Mr. Lancaster smirked. Great, she's fired. Elijah chuckled, shaking his head. No, she's not. He pulled out his phone. Mr. Lancaster scoffed. And what are you going to do about it? Elijah held up the screen. I just bought this diner. Silence. Mr. Lancaster's smirk vanished. You? What? Elijah put his phone away. And you're fired. The entire diner gasped. Mr. Lancaster stammered. You can't do that. Elijah crossed his arms. I just did. He turned back to Mia. You don't have to work here anymore. I'll make sure you and your baby are taken care of. Mia's eyes filled with tears. You'd do that for me? Elijah smiled warmly. Everyone deserves kindness. And you deserve a fresh start. As the entire diner erupted in applause, Mr. Lancaster stormed out. And for the first time in a long time, Mia felt hope. Lena Parker sighed as she wiped down a table, her hands sore from a long shift. She glanced at the clock, still 3 more hours to go. She never thought life would turn out like this. Years ago, she had big dreams. She had been one of the top students in business school. But after her mother's sudden illness, she dropped out to take care of her family. Now she was just a waitress. The bell above the diner's door chimed. A group of businessmen walked in, laughing and chatting. Lena barely looked up as she grabbed her notepad. Welcome to Joe's Diner. What can I get for you today? One man froze, staring at her. Lena? She looked up and gasped. It was Ethan Cole, her old college friend. The one who used to sit next to her in class, always borrowing her notes. The one who once said, one day, we'll take over the business world together. Lena forced a smile. Hey, Ethan. Long time no see. Ethan blinked in shock. What are you doing here? Her smile faltered. She looked down at her apron. I work here. Ethan frowned. But you were the smartest person in our class. You were supposed to run your own company. Lena chuckled, but it sounded hollow. Yeah, well, life had other plans. Ethan glanced around, then back at her. His face was unreadable. Then he stood up. "Come with me," he said. Lena blinked. "What?" I said. "Come with me." She shook her head. "Ethan, I'm working." "My boss will." Ethan pulled out his phone and made a call right in front of her. A few seconds later, her manager rushed out. "Mr. Cole, what an honor. What can I do for you?" Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "I want to buy this diner." Silence. Lena's heart stopped. Her manager laughed nervously. Sir, the diner isn't for sale." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Everything has a price. Name yours." The manager's eyes went wide. He swallowed hard. Ethan nodded. "That's what I thought." He turned to Lena. "You don't work here anymore." Lena felt her breath catch. "Ethan, what are you doing?" He smiled. "You gave up everything for your family. It's time someone helped you. Come work for me." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "Are you serious?" Ethan chuckled. "Lena, you were always meant for more than this. Let's build that empire we talked about." The entire diner watched in stunned silence. Lena wiped her eyes, then nodded. "Okay." As she untied her apron, the whole room erupted into cheers. And just like that, her life changed forever.